Hey, this is Annie.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
Okay, Annie, have you had one of those moments where you start daydreaming and then start thinking of like the worst case scenario in those daydreams? And then with that, there's some tragic event that happens in your mind and you start actually mourning something that really hasn't even happened?
I do that. And I understand how it can make things slip your mind. I do it pretty often. I actually think I do it kind of like once a day. Or I just start thinking like, I know I'm going to have to deal with this one day. And I know it's going to be miserable. I really don't want to deal with it. And then I feel bad because in this case, I'm talking about my mom currently. I'm like, you could just call her. Like, you're spending all this time anticipating not having her, and yet you aren't calling her.
Right.
It's kind of I mean, it's more complicated than that, but it is kind of a strange grief guilt spiral.
Mm-hmm. Actually, you're talking about a lot of the things that I want to jump into, and I'm very rushing. I guess I'm not, because I don't want to say I'm very excited or very like enthusiastic. Like, I'm not at all, because this is something that I think about and it hurts my heart. And I will say, go ahead and put this content warning. We are talking about death and grief. And there's a lot to talk about, especially if you've dealt with death recently, if you're a caregiver of someone who is sick, someone with any terminal illnesses. This could be a little hard. This will probably be hard. I don't know, but just let you know. And if you need to take some time and be like, I'll come back to this, completely understand. Do that for yourself. Because I had this moment of like, so when my first dog, Bennington Ziegler, yes, I named him Bennington Ziegler, his name from his previous owner who had died, and yeah, that puts me into a whole different spiral, had named him Benny. And of course I wasn't going to change his name because he was a senior dog. I think I was like 9 or 10 when I adopted him. So I wasn't going to change his name, but I was going to add to it, give my own little flair. So his name was Bennington Ziegler. When he died, I had a really hard time with it. And sometimes I start feeling really, really anxious about the death of my current dog, Peaches. She is now 10 and she's perfectly healthy. I'm going to put that out there. But for some reason, as I see her hair's turning a bit whiter and having some aches and pains, like, you know, when she gets off the couch, she kind of like limps a little bit to shake it off. This has been new. I started really imagining what the end might be with her, and I immediately start crying. Like, my partner has come in when I'm hugging my dog and bawling. And he's like, what's happening? Are you okay? And I'm like, I'm just imagining what it would be like if she dies, when she dies. And it's a constant. It's a constant in my head. And because I had such a hard time when Benny died. There's a whole lot of things to that. And honestly, like, I had him for a good 3 years, so it wasn't long because he already had health issues. Like, I adopted a senior dog with lots of health issues, but he lived a lot longer than people thought. So I got attached very quickly, but when he died, I was a mess for years. And I still am like tearing up as I'm talking about him. That's how much of attachment I have. And it took me years to get a new dog. Or another dog, because I was just in so much like I can't replace him. I can't go through this again, like all of those things. So as she is getting older, and I've had her for 9 years now, so like there's nothing that I take her to the doctor every year, get all the checkups, do all the extra things. Right now she's in perfect health, so there's no reason other than the fact that I'm watching her age and just had this little trauma of losing my dog previously, which is nature. Of course, this is nothing new, and I'm not the only one that goes through this. In fact, this is called anticipatory grief. And many, if not all people, I'm gonna put that blanket statement out, experience this. From veryhealth.com, they say, anticipatory grief is a state of deep, painful sorrow that occurs before an impending loss. It can affect people facing the impending death of a loved one or their own death, which I have that. I dream of my own death. Or not, I guess a daydream of my own death. I've dreamed about my death too.
I worry that I'll die before my mom does. Which, by the way, I just want to say my mom is also in good health. So she's much better than me about like getting things checked out. But I'm worried that I'll die first, and not because I know how much that would hurt her.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think about that too. So the article continues. Anticipatory grief is defined as grief that occurs before a loss. The term is often used in the context of death, but can encompass the impending loss of things not related to death. Anticipatory grief is common both among caregivers and those being cared for, often occurring simultaneously. Anticipatory grief is more than just normal grieving that starts early. So it's a thing. Many people have dealt with this, counselors deal with this, and everybody talks about it. It's just not often named. I know sometimes I feel like I'm doing too much or being dramatic when I feel these ways, but it's very common. Interestingly, according to the article, which, by the way, is titled "What is Anticipatory Grief?" Written by Dr. Lynn Eldridge, they state that younger people are more affected. It says younger people tend to experience anticipatory grief more often and more traumatically, in part because they have experienced loss less often than an older person and may have a more conceptual view of death. So, in one of the ways they were talking about, like, they see death as the final end. And so the final end seems so scary and doomish that they may have it more traumatically, which I don't know. I think we all feel that. Don't get me wrong. Of course, the reasons for anticipatory grief is different for everyone. I've had many conversations with my friends who have parents who are getting older, talking about the fear of losing a parent as well. So what you were just talking about with your mom, but like when we see things that have like health scares, which are more commonly happening to older people, that really puts us in a moment of like trauma, a traumatic response of waiting and thinking the worst case scenario, which is what I do often. And like my father just went through a health scare and we're on the other end of it. But at the beginning, I was spiraling, to the point that I would see my father every week. And that was not something that I do. Kind of like just in case moment, which is awful because it shouldn't be like that. But we've talked about this. And for those who have already had to grieve one parent or someone that are parental figures or very close to them in family or just in life are often traumatized by the experience and also have to work through their anticipatory grief in a different setting. So having lost one is so easy to be scared, or you're so traumatized and triggered and scared for your other people as well in your life. So it can be more on that note. And there's a difference between anticipatory grief and grief after death. From adorationhealth.com, they write, while anticipatory grief is very similar to grief after death, there can also be a lot of differences in the experience. In grief after death, you are facing a loss that has already occurred and must figure out how you're going to move forward in your new reality. In anticipatory grief, you know you will have to face this loss at some point in the future, but you can't know for sure when it will occur. You're in sort of an in-between state where your loved one is still there, but you know your time with them may be limited. This feeling can be more severe for some because you're trying to wrap your head around the idea of life without this person while they're still here. And again, that conversation, especially for those who are caretakers for terminally ill or elderly parents, is different because you're having to actually go back and forth with it and having to make plans. Even like, I think you were talking about it. My partner is going through it. I'm sure I'll have a conversation with my parents, but I'm the youngest, so it might be different. But the parents or the older generations getting ready as well, and so having to prep you for the aftermath. And that's really hard to think on.
It is. I mean, and it's so important. I'm a big believer in it because I have been with people who someone has died and they didn't talk about any of that. But it is painful because it's like acknowledging it often in like tangible, here's the will, here's like getting rid of this stuff already in the house, here's what I want you to do. It's just like a kind of having a very tangible, okay, I am going to have to deal with this one
Right.
day. Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's even harder for those who are the responsible ones. Again, I'm the youngest, so I don't have that, which I'm grateful for. But, my partner and yourself are the responsible one of the family.
Hmm.
So it makes it a little different, especially when it's constantly brought up to you, which is a whole thing.
Yeah, well, look, not to get into, I won't, but also I've talked about before, I don't have the best relationship with my brothers. So I'm also anticipating that,
Yeah.
making it more difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a lot. It's a lot to think about.
It is. It is a lot. And back to that verywellhealth.com article, they write, anticipatory grief is sometimes described as a roller coaster because you can shift back and forth between feelings of distress for several days and feelings of normalcy for several days. There may also be a part of you clinging to the hope that the diagnosis is wrong, buoying you at one moment and triggering intense anxiety at another. With conventional grief, your emotions and actions are reactive. With anticipatory grief, your emotions and actions are largely proactive. So there's definitely like that roller coaster. And again, this is a lot more like talking about working with people as a caretaker, watching people getting to that point or wondering if it's coming. So a lot of that has that moment, especially, and you talked about the fact that you feel guilty when you do have a normal day if something does feel wrong. Like it's just so many different levels to that conversation because you're grieving, but are you allowed to smile when you're grieving? You know, and if you're with someone who is sick and not healthy, are you supposed to be grieving, but you're, like so many things. So one of the biggest group of people that are affected by this type of grief, again, as we said, are caregivers. And with the fact that women make up like 81% of being caregivers for older people, and this is according to Commonwealth Fund, it shouldn't be surprising women are more likely to experience this type of anticipatory grief. And in fact, they talked about also how a lot of the women, I think like 40% that one survey showed of women were really, really struggling with this anticipatory grief, especially like they were, I think, caregivers of terminal cancer family members, and that anticipatory grief really weighing so heavily on them that was more stifling than those who was going through the grief at times. If that makes sense. Meaning like because the waiting and holding on and just the anticipation or the fear of losing that person becomes more overwhelming sometimes, and how a lot of these women really feel like that was so much harder than the
Yeah.
actual loss.
Well, I think another thing too is I one of my friends' dad died pretty suddenly, and his mom had largely been taken care of. Like, he was ill, but it wasn't like he's gonna die any day. But anyway, she he had a pretty strict diet, and she gave him like a kind of a sort of gumbo, and he died the next day. And I just remember her thinking, like, if I hadn't given him the gumbo, like having that, like, I think when you're in that anticipatory stage, you're thinking like, oh, maybe I can fix this, or if I do something wrong, like maybe I can make this better. And then once the person is gone, you don't have that anymore. But I do think that's a unique part of the anticipatory part, is like you are thinking, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do this. And then afterwards, you might still have those questions, but it doesn't have the same like unknown that's
Right.
weighing on you.
Right, for sure. And there's a lot in that conversation about the guilt in this, and that is actually one of the symptoms. So here are, there's like tons. Obviously, there's tons, single worded, how you're feeling, all these different ones. A couple of them are anxiety, guilt, dread, and worry, obviously. One of them is the rehearsal of death. And again, this is from the Very Well Minded. And I think, yeah, I definitely think of this. You may be visualizing what it will be like without your loved one. If you are dying, you may be imagining how your loved ones will carry on without you. Again, you might not be sick. That person or that pet may not be sick, but you're still imagining this because you're anticipating all of this. And it becomes, sometimes it can be overwhelming and you do it too often. I say this. Again, this applies to pet owners like myself. From aplb.org, which I think they're like a therapy thing for pet owners. and then also like works with pets. I don't know. Anyway, it says, while anticipatory grief commonly occurs when faced with the news of serious illness, a terminal diagnosis, or the realization that your pet is in significant decline, it may also be experienced as early as the first signs of aging. Christy Lehman, MSW, LISW, shares that changes related to advancing age may represent a series of many losses as time goes on. For example, as a dog ages and her arthritis worsens, she may one day no longer be able to go for her daily walk, climb stairs, or chase a ball. As pets age, the changes in activities of daily living represent endings. They remind us that our pet's end of life is drawing nearer. We grieve each of these various losses along the way, ultimately leading to the day when we realize that we will soon be saying goodbye. It is heartbreaking. Anticipatory grief will be felt more deeply in those highly bonded with their pets. Additionally, anticipatory grief may be experienced more profoundly with caregivers whose pets share links, connections, or memories to other people or animals that have died. The thought of losing their present pet may feel like losing that person or pet all over again, compounding the anticipatory grief reactions. I am sad right now.
Yeah.
But all of those things are very real. And again, like I'm talking about pets, but we know this is common for anything. Loss is loss, and it's hard, especially when you're attached or that's a part of your daily routine. There's so much to this. And I think we're like, I'm glad to know I'm not the only one, but I still don't want to experience it. And just so you know, they also have, from Very Well Minded, some maybe benefits of having this. One is that they are able to confront their fears rather than avoid them. Another is being able to say goodbye if you do get that chance. Another was to make preparations for their life moving forward. So all of these things can be benefits, but it's still not great. We don't want it. We'd rather not.
Hard.
We'd rather not. Let's be way clear on that. So how are some ways to cope with that? Because, we always got to end with something at least like, let's help out here. Share your feelings openly. I think, like, again, having more conversations, although when people get too open and tell me too many details, I start freaking out a little bit. I will say Reddit. There was a Reddit post where someone came in and was talking about that. And like, I feel this way. My pet is perfectly healthy, but I'm really sad. And then all these people came in, giving such great advice, giving heartwarming stories, a little too close to like being too real, talking about, I just lost my pet yesterday. So I'm like, I can't read all these things. But the community in that specific post was really sweet and really kind and caring. So that was nice to see. They also say maintain hope. And like if you can, sometimes getting in the right head to actually get things prepared, that can be helpful. One from kinship.com about pet lifestyle. It says, let your grief come. Let cry if you can. And it talks about also if you have a grieving friend to listen and to be there for them. So there's a lot. Thank you for going down this sad, sad journey with me. And I'm sorry I put this in, but it's been on my mind lately because I will say, bursting out crying every now and then when I look at my pet, not a fun hobby.
No. It's tough. It really is. It really is. Well, certainly a lot more we could talk about with this. I'm sure listeners have some thoughts about this because, I think everybody experiences it. If you would like to contact us, you can email us at stephaniemomstuff@iheartmedia.com or hello@stuffmomnevertoldyou.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at Momstuff Podcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We have a YouTube page, we have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks, as always, to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.